long enough so it would stick together and become very hard. If you fill it, it's very hard. It's a hard, dense survival food. If you want to make a bunch of these and carry them with you, that would work. Yep. Actually smells wonderful. It smells like a granola or Wheaties or something. Yeah, it's just plain old grass seed. I added no water. I added nothing to it. It's just plain old grass seed.
Wow.
And just smashing it.
Yeah.
It didn't turn into powder.
No, because it wasn't. I didn't dry it out. I didn't parch it. So it naturally has a little tiny bit of water that will allow it to stick together.
So you mentioned the chemical that could be in the grass seed.
Ergo. It's a fungus.
Fungus.
Yeah. Avoid grass heads that have turned black or have a black powdery stuff.
Oh, okay. Because I was like, I missed that part.
Yeah. Yeah. Other than that, all grass seeds are in fact edible. Okay, there's actually a number of seeds you can gather other than grass seeds, like sunflower seeds. Here I've got a new one that I want to experiment with. It's not really, it'll tell you in edible plant books that this plant is edible as a green. This is curly dock, but it doesn't talk about the seeds. But I have found online that they are in fact edible, and I want to do some experimenting with extracting them and using them. And it grows in the ditches everywhere in South Texas. This is the seed heads that you'll see. At first, from a distance, I kind of thought it might be amaranth, so I got all excited, but it wasn't. But still, I think it may be useful. The seeds are very small, but because you can gather so many and it's easy to process them, I think it would be worth the effort.
Where did you say that is?
Curly dock. Curly dock. Yeah. It's called that because the leaf edges, the leaves are long and kind of elongate, and they're curly on the edges. What? Oh, D-O-C-K. Yes.
We have amaranth at our house. My
Awesome.
son's been eating it. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, amaranth is a really good one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Amaranth may be the only one. This is something else I wanted to talk about is protein. Protein is a macronutrient that you need in a... Good thing we have this tablecloth.
Yeah.
It's a protein is a macronutrient that you need in larger amounts, measured in grams. Now, when you eat food, your protein is broken down by enzymes into amino acids. Now, there are some amino acids that your body cannot manufacture, and you need to get those from other sources. Most plant foods don't have all the amino acids that you need. So if you're only eating one plant food, you're not going to get them all. There are a few that do. I think amaranth might be one of them. Soy might be one of them. And sometimes what you can do is combine two different ones, like corn and beans. If you combine those two seeds, you can get a complete protein. But obviously, you're not going to have a lot of plants if you're trying to survive in Texas. You're not going to be able to get that complete protein from plants most of the time. So you're going to have to look somewhere else for it. I don't know if you are interested in eating animals or if there's any vegetarians here, but I'll just briefly mention animal food nutrition. I actually was a vegan for a year, so I understand it. But
But you're not anymore.
no.
Not when
No,
you're trying
I was
to
a vegan
survive.
for a whole year in college, and it was very difficult for me to get enough protein. And I ended up getting a lot of headaches, so I stopped going that route. And it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to be a vegetarian living off the land. Because you just can't get enough food.
Calories.
Yeah, calories are a big thing. Like trying to eat 1,000 dandelions versus one rabbit. One rabbit has all the calories you need for a day. Just real briefly, here's a study that I've done. You will not find this anywhere else, as far as I know. What I've done is there have been zoo nutritional studies for like jaguars, lions, monkeys. When they feed them, they need to know how much food to feed their animals. So they calculate how many calories are in like a ground up whole deer or something. See how many calories like 100 grams has. Well, what I did is took some of their information and like there's obviously no information on armadillos. So I took an animal that's kind of similar to an armadillo and used the data from that and converted it with the armadillo's weight to try to figure out how many calories would be in these animals and which ones are really worth going after if you are in a survival situation. Here I've got them ranked from the least caloric value to the highest caloric value. On the low end, we have the mouse at 33 calories, which is virtually nothing. You have to eat 40 to 50 mice in a day, which would be very difficult. Now still, if you're in a survival situation, the Native Americans in Texas actually ate mice. Why do you think they did that if they only had that many calories?
Lots of mice.
And they weren't eating 40 mice a day, they were just eating maybe 5 or 6.
So they wouldn't eat their crops.
Yeah, that would be one thing. So they would just eat food. I remember the Native Americans in southern and western Texas and near the Pecos area didn't grow anything, but they would be storing crops. They would be storing pecans, they would be storing mesquite beans, so they would keep them for that.
That'd be a lot
But
of nice.
the protein that they've got is 5 grams. That's very high. It's higher than the plant foods. So that's why they would go after those small animals, the mice and lizards and that type of thing. But on the high end, this is incredible. Deer, 112,000 calories.
Oh my
This is tremendous. It could feed a group of 10, 20 people for several days, a week maybe. If you're by yourself, maybe a month or 2. So you really want to go after the animals. The problem is, here's another thing, in optimal foraging theory, you have to decide whether an animal is worth going after. Are they common enough? Are they easy enough to find? How difficult is it to actually hunt them down after you find them? So over here I've got a graph. As you go this way in the graph, you're going to have more calories per animal. As you go up though, the population density is going to increase, so they're going to be easier to find. Behind we have the mouse, very high population density. Down here we've got the porcupine and the jackrabbit, very low population density, and the deer low, but they still went after deer. The Native Americans still hunted deer because if by chance they could bag a deer, they would feed their group for a very long time, and they wouldn't have to go out eating thousands of dandelions. So the more leisure time they could get, the better. Because that was the richness of hunter-gatherer culture. They didn't have money, they didn't have stuff to carry around. Their riches were in how much time they had to spend with their family members. So what they would aim for is animals kind of in the middle of the graph. Animals that are fairly common, but also good-sized animals, not too small, that have calories. The cottontail rabbit, the squirrel, the opossum, the raccoon, the armadillo, and maybe the javelino, but almost fit into there. So those are where they're going out. The guys are going out and hunting these every single day. But still, the women are gathering the plant foods. They've always got those plant foods to come back to. And in Texas, this brings us to another plant food. We've got a special plant food that made it so the hunter-gatherers would never starve to death, as long as you know this plant and how to prepare it.
All right. There we go.
Yeah. Still, though, it's a survival food. The reason for that is, even though it has an enormous amount of calories, maybe several thousand calories in this heart, it takes a lot of your calories to process it. You cannot eat the plant raw. It's got those steroidal saponins that cause your red blood cells to explode.
What planet? What?
I'm not going to say the name yet.
Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of a relative of the yuccas and agave plants. It is called Sotol.
All
The
right.
scientific name is Dacilarion. Kind of hard to spell. Sotol, though, it doesn't look like this big bowl. This is actually where we're going to eat. It doesn't look like that in the wild. It actually has rosettes, basal rosettes of these leaves with spikes with like saw edges along both sides of the leaf. So if you try to go like this, your hands get stuck in the spikes. If you try to go like this, your hands can slide along the spikes. They're recurved spikes. And it looks a lot like the yucca, but much, much bigger. So what you've got to do,
Those
first
things
of all,
with the big bulb on
yeah,
top. that's
huge.
exciting.
They're not on top. They're going to be growing right on the ground for the most part.
Yeah.
And they're going to have a big stalk coming out of the middle, sometimes. You want to get them before that stalk comes up. After the stalk has come up, the growth of that stalk uses up all the carbohydrates, a lot of the carbohydrates in the heart. But right before that, it's kind of concentrating the carbohydrates and kind of converting them into sugars. So you want to get them before that. And that's why early spring and winter, this is going to be your major food source. Now what you've got to do is you've got to cut all those leaves off. You've got to cut the plant down. And remember, they're using tools like this. They don't have steel axes. They have stone tools like this. Now, when you first nap them, they're very effective. They're extremely sharp. They're sharper than a razor blade. Actually, I just cut my finger. They're extremely sharp because when you smack a rock like that, it flakes down to the very last molecule. They're one molecule thick on the edge. And when you're making an iron knife, you've got to file them, and it's not a molecule thick necessarily. So their knives are going to dull very fast. So you can imagine this was a lot of work for them to do. And when they're doing these earth ovens, they might be cooking several of these, maybe 5. And maybe other kinds of hearts too. This is a very small Sotol heart, but they would eat stuff this big. This is a heart of an agave called lechuguilla, agave lechuguilla. That grows out in West Texas, New Mexico, and is the key plant of the Chihuahuan Desert, but very, very small. So you process all these plants, you cut their leaves off, you cut them off their base, which that's the really hard part, is getting them off their base because it's got a really thick stem that's attached. This is not a root or a bulb, by the way. This is actually something that's growing above ground. But after you do that, you've got to dig a pit.
After the leaves are cut off.
Yeah, because remember you can't eat them raw. You dig your pit, You pile up firewood, hundreds of pounds of firewood in your pit. Your firewood might make a pile this tall and this big around. You pile your firewood up. You put very large rocks on top of the firewood. This is important. And this is actually kind of, they might be thicker than this, maybe twice as big. Twice as big. Put the rocks on top of the firewood. Light the fire. The fire is huge, extremely hot.